Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the life of one of the 20th century's most fascinating and, frankly, mysterious figures, Ho Chi Minh. We're going to piece together the story of the man who guided Vietnam's fight for independence through decades of unimaginable conflict. Well, to millions, he's the father of modern Vietnam. He's the beloved Uncle Ho who dedicated his entire life to freeing his nation. But the real story, the details of his life, are wrapped up in so many layers of mystery and transformation. Starting with the one thing we think we know for sure, his name. 50 to 200. That's the estimated number of aliases and pseudonyms he used throughout his life. And this wasn't just some kind of quirk, It was a critical survival tool for a man who spent decades as a revolutionary, constantly on the move and operating in the shadows. All right, so let's get right into it. If we want to understand the leader, we first have to find the man. And that journey starts with a name that almost nobody recognizes. So right from the get-go, his identity was, fluid. He was given a new name when he was 10, Nguyen Tat Thang, which was part of tradition, but this was just the beginning of a life of constant reinvention, a life that was really shaped not in Vietnam, but thousands of miles from its shores. His political education didn't come from some fancy university. No, it was forged in the fire of years of travel and really tough menial labor, where he got to see the machinery of empire from the inside out. Just take a second to look at this journey. From a French steamship to the kitchens of New York and London, he wasn't just seeing the world, he was living it. This incredible 30-year odyssey opened his eyes to radical new ideas, like Marcus Garvey's Pan-Africanism in Harlem, which taught him about global solidarity, and it showed him the deep hypocrisy of the colonial powers he worked for. Now, this was a huge moment. He shows up in Paris using a new name, Nguyen I Quoc, which means Nguyen the Patriot. And he tries to appeal to world leaders like President Woodrow Wilson. He wasn't even asking for full independence yet, just basic rights. And the fact that the Western powers just blew him off completely, that was a profound lesson for him. This quote really captures his change in thinking. It's like, okay, if the West won't listen, he's going to find allies somewhere else. He started to see Vietnam's struggle as part of a much bigger, global fight, connecting with anti-colonial movements all over the world, from Ireland to Korea. So now we're going to see how those ideas turn into real action. His travels taught him what he was fighting for. His time in Moscow taught him how to fight. After years of being an agent for the Communist International, he finally goes back to Vietnam and creates the Viet Minh. And this is key. It wasn't just a communist party. No, it was a broad nationalist front, a coalition designed to bring as many Vietnamese people as possible together under one powerful goal: independence. You can see the clear, methodical steps here, right? This was not some spontaneous uprising. It was the result of 2 decades of incredibly patient organizing, building networks that stretched all the way from Paris to the jungles of northern Vietnam. The name itself was basically a mission statement. He wasn't just Nguyen the Patriot anymore. He was now the bringer of light. And with World War II weakening France's control and Japan occupying Indochina, he suddenly had the name, the organization, and the perfect historical opportunity he'd been preparing for his entire life. So, when Japan surrendered in 1945, Ho seized his chance. He declared Vietnam's independence in Hanoi. But, declaring your nation is one thing. Actually securing it is a whole different ballgame. His biggest fights were still to come. The French had absolutely no intention of giving up their prize colony. What came next was a grueling, brutal 8-year war. Ho's Viet Minh forces, using guerrilla tactics, eventually trapped the French army and pulled off a stunning, world-shaking victory at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. Wow. Whether he said those exact words or not, that quote just perfectly captures the grim, unwavering determination that defined his whole strategy. He knew his greatest weapon wasn't guns, but the absolute will to outlast his enemy, no matter what the human cost. But building this new nation in the North, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, had a really dark side. To consolidate power, his government was ruthless. It moved to wipe out all opposition, jailing and executing thousands of political rivals, and launching a radical and often incredibly brutal land reform campaign. That's the estimated number of executions that took place during the land reform campaign. Now, early Cold War estimates were way, way higher, but even the more recent analyses point to a number that is just staggering. And this was pretty extraordinary. For Ha to get up and publicly apologize was a rare, rare admission of failure. It really underscored just how violent and chaotic those early years were. The revolutionary had become a ruler, and now he was facing the bloody consequences of his own policies. So, the victory over France? It didn't bring peace. Instead, the Geneva Accords split Vietnam in two, which basically set the stage for an even bigger, bloodier conflict. Ho would spend the rest of his days as president of a nation at war, but this time with the world's greatest superpower, the United States. During the American War, Ho became this global icon of resistance. He was the face of the struggle, the figurehead. But by the mid-1960s, his health was failing, and the day-to-day running of the war had really passed to other people, like Lê Duan. And in the end, he died before the fall of Saigon, never actually getting to see the unified Vietnam he'd fought for his whole life.
And this is the fundamental conflict of his legacy, isn't it? Was he the kind, benevolent Uncle Ho, the father of his nation? Or was he a ruthless authoritarian who crushed anyone who stood in his way? The truth is, he was both.
This brings us to the big debate historians still have. What was his true loyalty? Was it to Vietnam, or was it to communist ideology? Some will point to his early appeals to the U.S. as proof that he was a nationalist first and foremost. But others will point to his decades as a Comintern agent as proof that he was a communist to his core. What truly drove him is still fiercely debated. And maybe nothing captures the complexity of his life and legacy better than this last detail. The man who used hundreds of names, who lived so much of his life in secret, who asked for a simple cremation, was instead transformed after his death into a permanent, embalmed icon of the state. It was a final reinvention that he never chose for himself. In the end, the challenge isn't to pick a single label for him. It's to understand the entire unbelievable journey, from a cook's helper to a president, from a petitioner to a revolutionary. The real task is to be able to hold both the liberator and the tyrant in our view at the very same time, because that is the true and deeply complex legacy of Ho Chi Minh.